You think breakfast was simple back then? Black mothers in the 1970s performed daily miracles before dawn, feeding entire families while the streetlights still glowed. These weren't lazy cereal mornings. They were acts of love executed with military precision. Here are 60 quick breakfasts Black mothers made before rushing out the door. Rice pudding. Hot cereal turned yesterday's pot of rice into a creamy, comforting breakfast that stretched ingredients and budgets with ease. Cold cooked rice was stirred into a saucepan of warm milk, sugar, and a hint of vanilla, then simmered until it thickened to a soothing porridge. A dusting of nutmeg or cinnamon brought gentle spice, while some families added raisins or chopped pecans for extra flavor. African American cooks valued this dish for its thrift and versatility, using leftover rice from dinner to create something entirely new the next morning. Served in deep bowls with a pat of butter melting on top, it filled the house with a cozy aroma that made chilly mornings feel welcoming. Children loved its gentle sweetness, and parents appreciated how quickly it came together while providing hearty nourishment. Rice pudding. Hot cereal stood as a quiet reminder that resourcefulness and flavor could walk hand in hand, proving that simple ingredients could become a treasured morning ritual. Molasses cornmeal custard was a dish that offered sweetness and substance while depending only on pantry staples. Families baked it by whisking cornmeal, milk, eggs when available, and molasses into a smooth mixture that thickened into a soft pudding in the oven. It was inexpensive to prepare, but filling enough to feed a household, making it a beloved breakfast or after-supper treat. The flavor was earthy and rich, with the deep sweetness of molasses carrying through each bite. Children often looked forward to it as a rare indulgence in households where desserts were not common. Adults valued it for its practicality, since it used cheap ingredients that could stretch for days. Molasses cornmeal custard represented thrift, but it also carried warmth and a sense of care, showing how families turned necessities into moments of comfort. It became part of the memory of kitchens during times of struggle, a dish that balanced scarcity with sweetness. Sweet potato biscuits brought sunshine into the morning, their golden color glowing like joy itself. Grandparents mashed leftover sweet potatoes into flour, sugar, and a bit of lard, turning scraps into softness. The dough came together with care, rolled out and cut by hand before baking to perfection. The smell that drifted from the oven was sweet, nutty, and full of promise. When pulled apart, the biscuits were tender and bright, sweetened naturally by the potato. No jam was needed, just warmth, butter if it was there, and the pride of making something beautiful from leftovers. Kids would eat them fast, the edges still too hot to touch. It was breakfast that felt like celebration, even on the poorest days. Every bite reminded the family that sweetness could grow from hardship, that nothing given by the earth ever went to waste. The color of the biscuits looked like morning sunlight captured in bread form, glowing against the gray of lean years. Every soft bite spoke of love and cleverness, proof that even scraps could bloom into something whole. It was a kind of quiet victory, one baked, not bought, and shared with joy. Salmon, croquettes, and grits were the Christmas breakfast that made everyone feel rich, even when times were lean. Grandparents opened a can of salmon, mixed it with onions, cornmeal, and a little egg, then shaped it into perfect patties. They fried them in a cast-iron skillet until golden, the edges crisp and crackling. The smell was buttery and bold, filling the air with promise. Served over creamy, slow-cooked grits, the croquettes glistened under a drizzle of hot sauce or melted butter. It was a meal that spoke of care and ingenuity, turning pantry staples into celebration. The first bite melted between salt and comfort, smoky fish meeting the silk of the grits. It was both breakfast and blessing, the kind that stayed in memory long after the plates were cleared. On Christmas morning, it reminded families that joy didn't come from wealth, but from the love stirred into the skillet. How cakes with butter and sugar were the sweet breakfast treat that felt almost like dessert, even though they came from the simplest ingredients in the pantry. Made from cornmeal batter poured onto a hot skillet, each cake sizzled as it spread, forming a crisp edge and soft center that tasted perfect every single time grandparents would flip them with practiced ease, stacking them high and spreading butter that melted instantly into the warm surface. A sprinkle of sugar added just enough sweetness to make the hoe cakes feel like a special morning indulgence. They were quick, affordable, and comforting. The kind of food that made children sit down fast and quiet at the table. Hoe cakes were history and home all at once, a dish born from necessity that became a beloved tradition. Even now, the memory of that buttery sweetness lingers in the minds of anyone lucky enough to grow up with them. Corn fritters with syrup were the morning's golden reward for those who knew how to turn scraps into sweetness. Leftover corn or cornmeal batter was mixed with milk, sugar, and a touch of salt, then spooned into a hot skillet where it puffed and browned into tender cakes. The air filled with the smell of butter and corn, sweet and comforting all at once. Once stacked on a plate, a drizzle of syrup sealed the deal. Sticky, glossy, irresistible. The first bite had a little crisp from the edges and a soft heart that melted on the tongue. Fritters like these were both breakfast and memory, made by grandparents who never threw a thing away. They were perfect with coffee, even better with laughter, and best when shared. No one called them fancy, but they felt that way, proof that love and creativity could make anything shine. Bacon drippings gravy over day-old cornbread was Thanksgiving morning thrift that transformed yesterday's bread into today's satisfying meal. Bacon grease saved from frying was heated in skillets. Flour was whisked in to create roux, then milk was added to make creamy gravy. This savory sauce was poured generously over crumbled day-old cornbread that soaked it up like a sponge. The result was filling, flavorful, and cost virtually nothing. Grandmothers never threw away bacon drippings, storing them in jars to use for cooking and flavoring. The gravy provided fat and calories needed during cold months, while the cornbread offered substance. Children ate this without complaint, enjoying the rich flavors. Adults appreciated the ingenuity of making leftovers feel intentional. Bacon drippings gravy over cornbread proved that even the simplest ingredients could create satisfaction. Skillet cornbread with cracklings combined the golden crunch of cornmeal with the savory richness of pork, delivering a breakfast that satisfied both hunger and nostalgia. Coarse cornmeal was mixed with buttermilk, eggs, and baking powder, then poured into a hot cast-iron skillet lined with sizzling bacon fat. Into this batter went crispy pork cracklings, their salty flavor infusing the bread as it baked to a deep golden brown. The cracklings provided chewy, savory bursts that contrasted beautifully with the tender crumb of the cornbread. Served in thick wedges, it paired perfectly with greens, eggs, or a simple drizzle of honey. This recipe honored the African-American tradition of using every part of the hog, wasting nothing while maximizing flavor. Skillet cornbread with cracklings stood as a reminder that resourcefulness could produce incredible taste, making a simple grain-based bread feel like a luxurious treat that filled the kitchen with a smell impossible to forget. Pork dripping toast was a breakfast born of thrift, where nothing from a meal ever went unused. After roasting pork, families saved the fat drippings, which cooled and solidified into a spreadable form. Spread over a slice of bread and warmed, it became a quick, filling meal that carried both flavor and energy. Children often ate it before school, while adults grabbed it before heading to long days of work. The taste was rich and salty, a reminder of the meat that provided it even when only fat remained. Pork dripping toast reflected both scarcity and ingenuity, turning something that might otherwise be discarded into sustenance. It was a dish remembered fondly for its practicality, though it spoke clearly of hard times. For many, the memory of pork dripping toast carries with it the smell of the kitchen, the sound of a skillet cooling, and the resourcefulness of families who could not afford to waste a single drop. It was humble, yet deeply tied to survival. Smoked herring and rice was the ocean's gift to the southern kitchen. The herring came salted and cured, strong enough to scent the air even before cooking. Grandparents soaked it first, softening its bite, then fried it in a pan until the edges curled and crisped. The fish went over hot rice, its smoky oil dripping down like seasoning. The meal was bold, salty, rich, and unforgettable. For those who lived near the coast, it was a taste of home and history, connecting generations through flavor. The smell might have been sharp, but it spoke of sustenance and pride. Smoked herring and rice was food that filled the stomach and lingered on the soul. It reminded everyone that humble ingredients could build mighty traditions. Every plate told the same story of struggle, resourcefulness, and the sea's generosity, carried into the kitchen with faith and fire. The salt of the fish met the warmth of the rice in perfect rhythm, a balance of sea and soil. Sometimes a splash of hot sauce or a side of cornbread completed the plate, making something humble feel whole. Even long after breakfast was done, the scent stayed, a memory of mornings when families found strength in what they had and gratitude in what they shared. Baked cinnamon apples and raisins brought Christmas mornings to life with a smell that felt like home. Grandparents sliced soft red apples, tossing them with butter, brown sugar, and a handful of raisins in an old baking dish. The oven worked slow, turning everything tender and golden, the edges bubbling with caramelized syrup. The scent of cinnamon filled every corner, warm and familiar. It was a dish that didn't need luxury, only love and patience. Served warm, it tasted like memory. Sweet, rich, and comforting in its simplicity. Children spooned it over biscuits or ate it plain, steam rising as they smiled through each bite. It was dessert for breakfast, comfort for cold mornings, and love disguised as thrift. Baked cinnamon apples and raisins reminded families that Christmas joy could come from the simplest things pulled from a pantry and shared with care. Salt pork gravy over bread was one of those breakfasts created from necessity, yet it tasted like something that belonged in a country diner. Grandparents would fry slices of salt pork until the fat rendered out and the meat crisped, releasing a savory aroma that meant a hearty meal was on the way. The drippings were whisked with flour and milk to create a thick, salty gravy that clung to the spoon, rich and filling despite its humble ingredients. Poured over toast or biscuits, it transformed simple bread into something warm and deeply satisfying. This was a breakfast made for long days and empty pockets, a way to stretch flavor as far as it could go. Children did not think about thrift. They just knew the gravy tasted good and made the morning feel special. The saltiness, the creaminess, and the soft bread soaking up every drop created a combination that lingered in both taste and memory. It was the kind of meal that carried families through tough times and still managed to feel generous. Even today, people who grew up with salt pork gravy remember it with a fondness that nothing else can quite match. Homemade donuts were a labor of love long before convenience ever came in a box. Families mixed flour, eggs, milk, and a little sugar by hand, rolling the dough on floured tables before cutting perfect rings. The oil had to be just right, hot enough to bubble but not burn, and the kitchen filled with the smell of sweetness meeting heat. Each donut puffed up golden and soft, kissed with crispness at the edges. Once drained, they were rolled in sugar or dipped in glaze, still warm and tender. Children waited eagerly, dusting their fingers in sugar while stealing the first taste. These weren't store-bought treats. They were handmade rewards, crafted slowly on quiet mornings. A batch of donuts meant love, celebration, or simply the joy of having enough ingredients to spare. They were simple yet sacred, proof that happiness could be fried and shared. Some cooks made holes into tiny donut balls, frying them as munchkins before the name ever existed. Others flavored the dough with nutmeg or a splash of buttermilk for tang. The smell of homemade donuts lingered like a song through the house, reminding everyone that effort and sweetness often went hand in hand. Pan-fried liver mush with mustard on toast was Thanksgiving morning protein using preserved organ meat to create hearty breakfast. Liver mush, that Appalachian creation combining pork liver with cornmeal and spices, was sliced and fried until the exterior crisped while the interior stayed creamy. Served on toasted bread with sharp mustard, it provided sustaining nutrition. This breakfast appeared in Black households influenced by Appalachian foodways, where cultures overlapped. The liver mush was economical because organ meats were cheaper than muscle meat but packed with nutrients. Grandmothers fried it quickly, creating breakfast that lasted through morning preparations. Children acquired the taste gradually. Adults valued how the small serving provided significant protein and energy. Pan-fried liver mush with mustard represented the blending of regional traditions and practical wisdom of using every part of available animals. Fried bologna. Breakfast sandwiches turned a simple deli meat into a beloved morning indulgence across African-American neighborhoods. Thick slices of bologna were scored around the edges to keep them from curling, then fried in a hot skillet until the surface blistered and caramelized. The sizzling meat was stacked onto soft white bread with a fried egg, crisp lettuce, or a slice of tomato, creating a sandwich that was both hearty and comforting. Some cooks added a swipe of mustard or a layer of melted cheese, while others preferred it plain to let the smoky flavor shine. Affordable and quick, it became a weekday staple for families and workers needing a satisfying meal before heading out the door. Fried bologna breakfast sandwiches captured the era's love of bold, simple flavors and the creativity of cooks who turned modest ingredients into something memorable, proving that even the humblest cuts could create a breakfast worth savoring with every crisp, savory bite. Cabbage and onions with cornbread made a humble breakfast that filled both the belly and the heart. When meat was scarce, the skillet became a garden feast. Grandparents chopped cabbage fresh from the yard or the market, tossing it with sliced onions and a bit of lard or grease. The smell that rose from the pan was earthy and warm, like hope frying slow. As it cooked down, the cabbage softened and the onions turned sweet, making a broth rich enough to dip bread into. Cornbread baked in the oven beside it, crusty on top and tender inside. The two came together on the plate, steam rising in quiet grace. It was not fancy, but it was full of care. The kind of meal that kept families going through hard seasons, reminding them that flavor did not come from plenty. It came from patience. Every bite spoke of the land, of effort, and of faith in simple things. The cornbread soaked up the juices, catching every drop like a blessing. In those moments, a table without meat still felt abundant, and no one left hungry. Stewed prunes with grits might sound plain today, but it was a dish that kept households nourished and children strong. Prunes were affordable, dried, and easy to store, making them a reliable sweetener when sugar was limited. Simmered until soft and paired with steaming bowls of grits, they turned into a balanced meal of fiber, sweetness, and filling grains. Large families often leaned on this combination because it could stretch far with little cost. For children, stewed prunes made breakfast feel less plain, while adults valued the strength it provided for long workdays. It was also a dish that traveled through generations, passed down as a memory of lean years and perseverance. Families carried bowls of this simple breakfast before marches, school, and shifts, finding strength in the comfort of familiarity. Stewed prunes with grits became a quiet but powerful dish of the civil rights era, proving that even the humblest meals could carry dignity and hope. Hogshead hash was a breakfast that spoke to the no-waste mentality of African-American cooking traditions that valued resourcefulness and respect for food. When a hog was butchered, nothing was left unused, and the head provided meat that could be stewed, chopped, seasoned, and fried into hearty dishes. Families would mix the shredded meat with potatoes, onions, and sometimes peppers, then cook it together in a skillet until browned, crispy, and richly flavored. The flavor was intense, smoky, and savory, and it filled the house with a smell that lingered long after breakfast was finished. It was not just food, but a reminder of how creativity and resourcefulness made survival possible in communities where every scrap mattered. Children grew up eating it without complaint because it was hearty, flavorful, and kept them full through school, farm work, or chores. Adults relied on it as a way to honor the animal by using every part of it, ensuring nothing went to waste. Though hogshead hash has nearly vanished from today's kitchens, it once stood as a powerful symbol of resilience, thrift, and respect for tradition that sustained families. Canned mackerel with eggs was one of those breakfasts that filled the house with a smell you never forgot, bold and rich, the kind of scent that told you someone was cooking with purpose. Grandparents used canned mackerel because it was inexpensive, packed with protein, and always waiting in the pantry when fresh meat was not an option. They would open the can, drain the fish, and flake it into a skillet with onions or peppers if they had them. Then came the eggs, cracked right over the fish and stirred until everything blended into a savory scramble that tasted far more filling than it looked. It was a hard-working breakfast, meant to fuel long days, and it carried a flavor that felt deeply tied to the kitchens of older generations. Children growing up on it did not always understand how thrifty it was, only that it tasted warm, smoky, and strangely comforting. First thing in the morning, the mackerel gave the dish a richness, the eggs softened it, and together they made something cheap but unforgettable. Even today, people who grew up with canned mackerel and eggs describe it as a meal that tasted like family resourcefulness at its finest. It was a reminder that nourishing food did not need to be fancy to be good. Gravy-soaked toast, known in military slang as SOS, became a homemade classic when adapted with love instead of rations. Leftover pan drippings from sausage or bacon were whisked with flour and milk, transforming into a thick, creamy gravy flecked with pepper. Instead of plain white bread, home cooks used toast made fresh that morning, letting it soak up the savory richness. It was simple but deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that filled empty stomachs and stretched scarce ingredients. Families learned to make it during hard times, and it stuck around because it was just that good. The combination of soft bread and velvety gravy made even an ordinary morning feel generous. Gravy-soaked toast was more than frugality. It was comfort made from care. Some added bits of sausage for heartiness, while others poured the gravy over biscuits instead, depending on what was on hand. It became a breakfast of survival and pride, the kind of food that tasted better than it had any right to. The aroma of sizzling drippings and toasting bread brought life to quiet mornings, reminding everyone that simple food done right could feed more than hunger. Gravy-soaked toast was an act of everyday kindness, a gesture that said, "We have enough, and we'll share it." Scrambled eggs with onions and peppers cooked in bacon grease created Thanksgiving meals that were colorful, flavorful, and economical. Fresh eggs were beaten until frothy, then poured into skillets where bacon had just been fried, leaving behind precious drippings. Diced onions and bell peppers, often saved from preparing dinner vegetables, were added directly as the eggs cooked. The vegetables softened while adding sweetness and texture. This breakfast used ingredients already in the kitchen for dinner preparations, preventing additional expense. Grandmothers cooked in large cast-iron skillets, making enough to feed 10 or more people. The bacon grease added richness and savory depth that butter couldn't match. Children picked out the peppers but ate the eggs eagerly. Adults appreciated the protein and vegetables, knowing the breakfast would sustain them through hours of cooking. Scrambled eggs with onions and peppers proved simple ingredients could create satisfaction. Sweet potato pancakes brought earthy sweetness and warm spice to kitchen tables, blending mashed sweet potatoes with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of milk. The batter sizzled as it hit the griddle, releasing a fragrance that filled the room with comfort. Each cake browned to a gentle crisp outside while remaining moist and tender within, offering natural sweetness without the need for heavy syrup. Many families grew their own sweet potatoes, making these pancakes a natural way to use the harvest through cooler months. Some cooks stirred in chopped pecans for a nutty crunch, while others added a hint of ginger for extra warmth. Served with a dollop of butter or a drizzle of cane syrup, sweet potato pancakes became a Saturday morning favorite, reminding everyone of autumn fields and family traditions. This dish honored the African-American love for root vegetables and the creativity of home cooks who turned humble ingredients into breakfast plates bursting with flavor and cultural memory. Cane syrup biscuits were one of the sweetest ways families could begin a day when sugar was a luxury. Freshly baked biscuits were split open and drizzled with thick cane syrup, a cheaper sweetener that was widely available in the South. This breakfast offered comfort and energy, especially for children heading to school or adults preparing for long days of labor. Cane syrup added richness to otherwise plain bread, transforming simple biscuits into a treat. It was a dish tied directly to the land, since cane syrup came from local harvests and represented self-reliance. Families treasured it because it gave sweetness without breaking the budget, a rare indulgence during lean times. Cane syrup biscuits became more than breakfast. They were symbols of hope, resourcefulness, and the sweetness people clung to even in struggle. The dish carried both nourishment and spirit, helping fuel resilience during mornings that demanded strength. For many, it was the taste of home and perseverance. Sorghum syrup biscuits were the sweet glue of country mornings, simple yet divine. Grandparents mixed flour, lard, and milk, cutting the dough by hand and baking it until the tops turned golden. While the biscuits rose, the sorghum syrup sat warming on the stove, thick, dark, and sticky as the sun coming up. Sorghum was cheaper than sugar and easier to find, made from local cane that families often grew themselves. When the biscuits came out, steaming and soft, a drizzle of syrup transformed them into luxury. The smell filled the room, earthy, rich, and pure. Kids licked their fingers, and adults smiled quietly, knowing this was a taste of home. The syrup clung to the edges of the biscuits, turning every bite into a memory. It was breakfast, dessert, and comfort all at once. Even on hard days, sorghum biscuits gave sweetness without waste. They were the pride of the Southern table, humble, homemade, and healing. Rice and molasses porridge was a breakfast that brought together comfort and thrift in one pot. Leftover rice was simmered slowly with water or milk until soft and creamy. Then molasses was stirred in for sweetness. The result was warm, filling, and affordable, giving families energy to start the day. Molasses was cheaper than refined sugar, and rice stretched further than bread, making this dish a natural fit for households trying to feed many mouths on little money. The flavor was rich and slightly tangy, a taste that children grew up associating with home and tradition. For adults, it was a reminder of both comfort and necessity, as it made use of ingredients that were always on hand. Rice and molasses porridge was a simple bowl, but it carried both nourishment and memory. Families ate it hot, often in large servings, to keep them going through long mornings. It was one of those breakfasts that disappeared quietly, yet left a strong mark in memory. Cornbread and buttermilk cups were the kind of breakfast that felt both rustic and comforting, the sort of meal grandparents made without measuring or fuss because they had been doing it their whole lives. Leftover cornbread never went to waste, not when it could be crumbled into a bowl and soaked in cold buttermilk until the pieces softened but kept just enough texture to make each bite interesting. The tang of the buttermilk balanced the slight sweetness of the cornbread, creating a flavor that felt simple yet deeply satisfying. Some families added a spoonful of sugar, others preferred it plain, but either way, it tasted like something honest and nourishing. It was a breakfast built for long days, a quick way to fill stomachs without spending money or time. Children who grew up on it remember the chilly shock of the buttermilk, the softness of the crumbs, and the quiet pleasure of eating something that required no stove at all. It tasted like tradition handed down through memory rather than recipes, a meal tied to rural kitchens, hardworking families, and morning routines shaped by practicality. Even today, people who try it for the first time often describe it as unexpectedly comforting, like discovering a forgotten piece of their own history. Cornbread and buttermilk cups might seem humble, but in the hands of grandparents, they became something far richer than the ingredients suggested. Fried potatoes and onions, or home fries as many called them, were the true breakfast of yesterday's leftovers. Cold potatoes from dinner were sliced thin and tossed in a skillet with sizzling butter or lard. Onions followed, their sweetness blooming as they browned. The two cooked together until the edges crisped and the smell filled the kitchen with comfort. Salt, pepper, maybe a pinch of paprika. That was all they needed. Each forkful was smoky and soft, full of the flavor that only time and care could give. It was food for early risers and late sleepers alike, eaten from chipped plates at wooden tables. Home fries were the definition of resourcefulness. Nothing wasted. Everything transformed. Served with eggs or just on their own, they carried the quiet satisfaction of a meal made from yesterday's effort. In the hum of the morning, that skillet was both memory and promise. Molasses milk poured over crumbled biscuits was Thanksgiving morning warmth that turned yesterday's baking into today's comfort food. Leftover biscuits were crumbled into bowls, then warm milk sweetened with blackstrap molasses was poured over until everything softened. The molasses provided iron and minerals, while the milk added calcium and protein. This breakfast cost almost nothing since it used leftover biscuits and household staples. Children loved the sweetness, even though molasses had stronger flavor than sugar. Adults appreciated how the simple bowl provided energy and fullness. The combination was especially common in homes where refined sugar was expensive but molasses was affordable. Grandmothers made this when resources were tight, knowing it would satisfy hungry stomachs. Molasses milk over biscuits proved that leftovers combined with creativity could become something genuinely comforting. Field pea and rice hash turned a simple pot of peas into a hearty breakfast that fueled long days with ease. Black-eyed peas were simmered with onions, garlic, and a little smoked meat until tender, then spooned generously over steaming white rice. The flavors melded into a comforting bowl of earthy beans and fluffy grains that filled stomachs and lifted spirits. In the 1970s, this dish connected generations, recalling the Hoppin' John traditions of New Year's Day, while serving as an everyday morning staple in many African-American homes. Some families stirred in hot peppers for a gentle heat, while others finished with a drizzle of pepper vinegar for brightness. Field pea and rice hash proved that a few inexpensive ingredients could yield both nourishment and rich flavor, keeping families strong and satisfied. It celebrated agricultural roots and the creativity of cooks who understood that true comfort comes from a well-seasoned pot and the love shared around the breakfast table. Fatback and grits was breakfast built on thrift and grit. The fatback sizzled in the skillet first, releasing its salty aroma as it browned and curled. The grease left behind became gold, seasoning the pot of bubbling grits to perfection. Stirred smooth, thick, and rich, the grits soaked up that savory flavor like a secret only the poor could afford to know. Grandparents served it in bowls, steaming and simple, with crispy bits of fatback on top. It was heavy in the best way, fuel for a long day of labor. There was pride in every bite, the kind of pride that came from making much out of little. Fatback and grits was not just breakfast, it was strength served with a spoon, a southern hymn sung over a hot stove. Sometimes a pat of margarine was dropped on top to melt into the heat, adding a layer of richness that made the bowl glisten. The meal was eaten slow, savoring every spoonful before the workday began. Grandparents said it was food that stuck to your ribs, and they were right. It kept you going long after sunrise. It tasted like memory and perseverance, like something deeper than hunger itself. Hog maw and potatoes was a breakfast that carried both weight and flavor for households that needed energy for the day ahead. Hog maw, or hog stomach, was cleaned carefully, seasoned, and slow-cooked until tender. Potatoes were added to the pot, soaking up the rich broth and spices as they simmered together. The result was a dish that was hearty, savory, and deeply satisfying, often eaten in large portions to provide strength before long hours in the fields or factories. Though not a delicacy, it was respected because it made use of parts of the hog that otherwise might have been discarded. The combination of meat and potatoes provided both protein and comfort, ensuring that families started their mornings with something filling. Hog maw and potatoes reflected resilience, turning less desirable cuts into meals that carried pride and tradition. Though it is rarely seen on tables today, it once served as a dependable morning staple. Scalded cornmeal porridge was one of the simplest breakfasts, but it was dependable and nourishing in every season. Cornmeal was whisked into boiling water, then enriched with a splash of milk if available, turning into a smooth, hot cereal. It was plain but filling, eaten with a little molasses, sugar, or even just salt depending on what a family had. Children grew up with bowls of it before heading to school, and adults leaned on it for early morning labor. The dish carried an earthy flavor that became familiar, tied to the smell of steaming pots in family kitchens. It was cheap to prepare and stretched far, making it a perfect meal during lean years. Scalded cornmeal porridge was proof that even the most basic ingredients could sustain life when nothing else was available. It became one of those dishes remembered with both fondness and respect, a reminder of perseverance and the strength found in simple foods. Molasses biscuits were one of those breakfasts that felt both humble and rich, depending entirely on the memory you brought to the table. The biscuits themselves were simple, mixed from flour, fat, and whatever milk or water could be spared, but it was the molasses brushed over the top that made them special. The dark sweetness soaked into the warm bread, giving each bite a deep flavor that felt like comfort stretching back generations. Grandparents baked these because molasses was cheap, shelf-stable, and full of the kind of sweetness that made children smile even when times were tight. The smell alone could bring the whole household into the kitchen, filling the air with something warm and grounding. Some families served them with butter, letting it melt into every crack, while others ate them plain, enjoying the caramel-like richness all on its own. These biscuits were not fancy, but they tasted like care, like effort, like mornings where love was baked into every crumb. They were the kind of breakfast that lingered in your memory long after the plate was empty, reminding you of kitchens where nothing was wasted and everything was shared. Molasses on hot biscuits was the taste of sweetness earned through patience. When sugar was expensive or hard to find, molasses filled the gap, dark, thick, and full of depth. Hot biscuits came out of the oven steaming, split open by hand, and dripping with butter before a spoonful of molasses turned them into something heavenly. The syrup pooled and soaked into the soft crumb, leaving behind a shine that caught the morning light. It was sticky on the fingers, rich on the tongue, and comforting in a way only handmade food can be. For many, it was the only sweet treat of the day, but that never made it ordinary. The flavor was bold, smoky, and deep. A reminder of cane fields, wood stoves, and family hands passing down recipes without a word written. Molasses on biscuits was the kind of breakfast that could make even the hardest morning feel gentle again. In the simplest kitchens, where nothing was wasted and every crumb mattered, this pairing stood as a small luxury, proof that joy could come from the humblest of ingredients. Leftover greens mixed with scrambled eggs created Thanksgiving morning plates combining vegetables with protein economically. Collard greens or turnip greens from earlier cooking were chopped and stirred directly into beaten eggs, creating green-flecked scrambles. The greens added earthiness and nutrition while the eggs provided richness. This breakfast cost nothing extra since it used greens already cooked. Grandmothers understood that combining leftovers with fresh eggs made both components more interesting. The Potlikker from the greens seasoned the eggs naturally. Children might have resisted plain leftover greens but accepted them willingly when mixed with eggs. Adults appreciated the nutritional wisdom of combining vegetables with protein. Leftover greens with scrambled eggs proved that creative combinations could make yesterday's food feel new and intentional. Hot water cornbread patties delivered the satisfying crunch of cast iron frying to countless Delta kitchens, where cornmeal was as common as morning sun. Cooks stirred hot water into fine cornmeal until the mixture held together, then shaped it by hand and slid it into shimmering oil. The patties sizzled and crisped, forming a browned crust that gave way to a tender interior. The method required no milk or eggs, only the steady skill of a practiced hand, making it accessible and quick. Families ate these cornbread rounds with eggs, greens, or a simple drizzle of honey when sugar was scarce. In many homes, the sound of batter hitting hot oil signaled breakfast was ready, filling the air with the nutty aroma of toasting corn. Hot water cornbread patties celebrated resourcefulness and flavor, reminding everyone that the best dishes often came from the simplest combinations of grain, heat, and love, passed down through generations of African American cooks. Rolled oats with sorghum drizzle were one of the more nourishing breakfasts that families turned to during lean years. Oats were cheap, filling, and easy to cook, while sorghum syrup replaced sugar as a natural sweetener. Together, they made a bowl that was hearty, sustaining, and connected to the land. Adults leaned on it to fuel long workdays, and children were sent off to school with the strength it provided. The flavor was earthy and slightly bittersweet, carrying the essence of thrift and self-reliance. Families valued it because it stretched far and could be flavored with seasonal fruit if available. Rolled oats with sorghum drizzle represented more than practicality. It symbolized survival, tied to agricultural tradition. It was a dish that reflected both health and heritage, remembered for its role in sustaining households during the civil rights era. It proved that nourishment could come from the humblest combinations, carrying families through mornings that demanded resilience and determination. Crackling bread was the sound and taste of tradition. Grandparents saved every pork scrap from butchering, frying them down until crisp. Those cracklings, salty and rich, were folded into cornbread batter that sizzled when it hit the skillet. The smell was deep, smoky, and warm, like comfort made edible. When it came out of the oven, the bread was golden brown, with crunchy bites hidden in every corner. It was heavy but satisfying, each piece holding the spirit of thrift and endurance. Families gathered around to eat it hot, breaking it apart with their hands. It was the kind of food that stretched a meal, that turned a handful of cornmeal and scraps into something filling and proud. Crackling bread was heritage baked into every crumb, a reminder that even the hardest times could taste good when shared together. The sound of the crust cracking filled the kitchen, mingling with laughter and the hum of stories passed down through generations. Every bite carried the memory of hard work, of families who found a way to turn survival into celebration. Served with greens or beans, it stood as proof that nothing from the land was wasted. In that bread lived history, care, and the soul of a people who made every meal mean something. Pickled pig's feet with rice was a breakfast plate that blended tang, tradition, thrift, and a powerful sense of cultural memory. Pig's feet were boiled, seasoned with spices, and pickled in vinegar, creating a dish that was both flavorful and long-lasting in households where preservation was survival. Served cold from jars or warmed gently on the stove, they were paired with rice, which balanced the sharp tanginess and made the meal hearty enough to carry people through long days of labor. For families with limited resources, this dish ensured that every single part of the hog was used and nothing valuable went to waste. The pickling process preserved the meat, allowing it to last far beyond what fresh cuts could manage in kitchens without refrigeration. Though the flavor was bold, tough, and not to everyone's taste, it carried strong roots in African American food traditions shaped by necessity and resilience. Rice added comfort, balance, and affordability, turning the plate into a full meal that could feed many. Pickled pig's feet with rice was not just food, but a cultural marker of thrift and endurance. Though rarely eaten today, it once stood as an important morning staple. Butter sugar toast was the quick, sweet breakfast many children rushed toward before school, made from nothing more than bread, butter, and a sprinkle of sugar. Grandparents spread the butter all the way to the edges, making sure every bite would melt just right. The toast warmed the sugar until it softened slightly, creating a delicate crunch that felt almost like a treat. It was simple, fast, and inexpensive, yet it tasted like something far more indulgent. For many children, this was the breakfast they could hold in one hand while tying their shoes with the other. It tasted like busy mornings, like running out the door with crumbs on your shirt, like the gentle love of someone who wanted you fed. Even when there was no time, butter sugar toast may be overlooked today, but the memory of it still lingers for anyone who grew up on its warm sweetness. Fried cornmeal cakes were the working man's pancakes, crisp at the edges, tender in the middle, and made from the same cornmeal that showed up at every Southern table. Mixed with milk, eggs, and a little salt, the batter went into a hot skillet and came out golden and bubbling. They could be eaten plain or drizzled with syrup, honey, or even a little molasses depending on what was in the pantry. The smell of frying cornmeal was unmistakable, sweet and nutty, a scent that meant comfort was close. These cakes filled stomachs and hearts alike, simple enough for every day but special enough to remember. They were the breakfast of farmers, laborers, and children who learned that love came in humble servings. Fried cornmeal cakes didn't just feed, they fortified, reminding everyone that a good day started with something made by hand. Biscuits with sorghum syrup and butter were Thanksgiving morning luxury made affordable through grandmother's baking skills and pantry staples. The biscuits were made from scratch using flour, lard, buttermilk, and baking powder, rolled out and cut with drinking glasses before being baked until golden. Sorghum syrup, cheaper than maple and more flavorful than corn syrup, was drizzled generously over split biscuits slathered with butter. The combination created flavors that felt indulgent, though the cost was minimal. Black families treasured sorghum because it connected them to Southern farming traditions and provided sweetness during hard times. Grandmothers kept large tins of sorghum in pantries, knowing it would last months. Thanksgiving morning biscuits were made fresh, still warm when served. Children ate them eagerly, syrup dripping down their chins. Adults savored them slowly, appreciating the craftsmanship required for perfect biscuits. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy provided a bold, bracing start to the morning with a flavor that lingered long after breakfast was done. Thick slices of country-cured ham were seared in a heavy skillet until their edges browned and their fat rendered into a savory base. Into that sizzling pan went black coffee, which deglazed the salty bits and created a thin, smoky gravy. The sharp bitterness of coffee balanced the ham's rich saltiness, producing a sauce both surprising and addictive. Poured over warm biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked in and carried a gentle caffeine kick that woke up the senses. Families across the South prized this dish for its simplicity and strength, a reminder of farm mornings when nothing went to waste. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy reflected the ingenuity of African-American cooks who transformed pantry basics into something unforgettable, a breakfast that spoke of resilience and tradition with every deep, savory bite. Cornmeal dumplings in milk were a dish that blended simplicity with comfort, making them a favorite in many households when mornings were cold and food was scarce. Dumplings were mixed from cornmeal and flour, shaped into small rounds, and simmered in sweetened milk until soft and tender. The result was both filling and slightly sweet, a dish that could serve as either breakfast or dessert depending on how it was prepared. For families with children, it was often given in the morning to ensure they had energy for school. Adults relied on it as well, especially when more costly staples like bacon or sausage were unavailable. Cornmeal dumplings in milk carried a sense of warmth and security, proof that even the humblest ingredients could create satisfaction. It was a dish remembered not only for its flavor, but for the way it stretched supplies in hard times. It became part of the rhythm of survival, tying family memories to the shared strength of the table. Rice and sugar with evaporated milk was the sweet salvation of the empty pantry. When fresh milk was gone and the cupboard was bare, grandparents turned leftover rice into breakfast magic. A little sugar, a splash of canned milk, and a stir over the stove brought it all together. The smell was soft, like sweetness and hope combined. It was warm and creamy, simple but satisfying, a meal that wrapped the stomach in comfort. Kids loved it because it felt like dessert, even when it was dinner from the night before reborn. Grandparents called it rice pudding without the fuss. It tasted like kindness and invention, like the beauty of never wasting what little you had. It was proof that love and survival could fit in a single bowl. Souse meat with eggs was a breakfast that showed how African-American cooks turned preservation into sustenance. Souse meat, made by boiling and seasoning pig parts into a gelatinous loaf, was sliced and fried in skillets until crisp at the edges. Served alongside eggs, it made for a hearty and protein-rich plate that was affordable for working families. The flavors were strong and savory, with vinegar and spice balancing the richness of the pork. Souse meat was common because it allowed families to preserve cuts that might otherwise go to waste, ensuring nothing was lost. For children, the texture could be unusual, but it was familiar to those who grew up with it as part of the household routine. Adults appreciated its practicality, especially when paired with eggs that added bulk to the meal. Though it has faded from most breakfast tables, souse meat with eggs once reflected resilience, tradition, and the unyielding ability to make much from little. Potato cakes from leftover mash were the kind of breakfast that proved nothing in the kitchen ever had to be thrown away. Grandparents mixed cold mashed potatoes with flour or cornmeal, shaping the mixture into patties that fried beautifully in a hot skillet. The outside crisped into a golden crust, while the inside stayed soft, warm, and comforting. It was a thrifty breakfast that used leftovers creatively and fed everyone well without costing anything extra. The cakes were often served plain, sometimes with syrup, and sometimes with butter melting across the top. They tasted like resourcefulness, like making the most of what you had, like the kind of wisdom passed down quietly from generation to generation. Even today, people remember those potato cakes as a breakfast that felt both humble and full of heart. Coffee and sugar cookies might sound like dessert, but to grandparents, it was breakfast worth rising early for. The coffee was strong and dark, the kind brewed in enamel pots that never left the stove. The cookies were soft or crisp, depending on the household, often flavored with a hint of vanilla or nutmeg. Dipped into the steaming cup, they softened just enough to melt in your mouth. It was a quiet morning ritual, not rushed, not fancy, but full of grace. Adults called it a quick bite. Children called it heaven. There was something timeless about it, the sweetness balancing the bitterness, the warmth balancing the chill of dawn. For many, this pairing was not indulgence, it was peace. Coffee and sugar cookies were the kind of breakfast that taught you to slow down, to savor, and to start the day grateful. Canned salmon patties with scrambled eggs provided Thanksgiving morning seafood when fresh fish wasn't available or affordable. Canned salmon was mixed with breadcrumbs, beaten eggs, and chopped onions, formed into patties and fried until crispy. Served alongside scrambled eggs, this breakfast offered double protein. The salmon patties cost little since canned fish was shelf-stable and economical. In Black households where Friday fish traditions remained strong, having seafood on Thanksgiving morning felt appropriate. The crispy coating contrasted with soft eggs, creating textural variety. Children picked at the salmon bones if any remained. Adults appreciated how the canned fish provided omega-3 nutrition without requiring fresh market trips. Canned salmon patties with eggs represented practical protein solutions that honored cultural food preferences while respecting limited budgets. Okra and tomato breakfast stew offered a savory morning alternative that celebrated the summer garden's best. Fresh okra pods were sliced and simmered with ripe tomatoes, onions, and a hint of garlic until the vegetables softened into a flavorful broth. The natural thickening quality of okra gave the stew a gentle body, making it perfect for ladling over warm cornbread. Some families added smoked sausage or a pinch of cayenne for a heartier dish, while others kept it purely vegetarian, letting the vegetables shine. Served steaming hot, it filled the kitchen with a scent both earthy and bright, reminding everyone of harvest days and backyard gardens. Okra and tomato breakfast stew reflected African American traditions of making the most of seasonal produce, proving that breakfast could be savory, sustaining, and deeply tied to the land. It invited families to gather early and savor the simple pleasure of fresh vegetables cooked with care and served with love. Salted fish cakes for breakfast carried a flavor that was bold, practical, and tied to tradition. Families made them by mixing scraps of salted fish with meal or leftover potatoes, shaping patties, and frying them crisp in a skillet. The result was savory, filling, and inexpensive, making it a reliable protein source when other meats were far out of reach. In coastal communities or areas where salted fish was a common trade, this dish became a morning standard, paired often with eggs if the household could spare them. Children sometimes found the taste strong, but adults appreciated its sustenance and the way it stretched simple ingredients. Fish cakes often carried the memory of family gatherings, with parents teaching children how to prepare them just as their parents once had. It was a dish that reflected survival, thrift, and culinary creativity, embodying how overlooked scraps could become the backbone of a morning meal. Salted fish cakes for breakfast held both history and hunger in balance, fueling resilience through humble bites. Homemade biscuits with cane syrup were a breakfast of pride, born from hands that worked and loved without rest. Grandparents woke early, sifting flour, cutting in lard, and rolling out dough on wooden tables dusted with years of memory. The smell of baking filled the house, the warmth spilling into every room. When the biscuits came out, Golden and steaming, the cane syrup waited nearby, thick and dark as molasses. It poured slow, catching the morning light like honey turned to amber. The sweetness mixed with the salt of the biscuit, creating comfort too deep to describe. It was the kind of meal that made you pause before the first bite, because it tasted like home. Every batch told a story, of mothers who made do, of children who grew up strong on simplicity. There was joy in its repetition, in the rhythm of making something real from so little. The meal said, "We might not have much, but we have each other." And that was enough. The sound of the oven door closing, the clink of a butter knife, the hush that followed the first bite, all of it became part of the morning ritual. That biscuit, soft on the inside and crisp at the edge, carried warmth that lasted long after breakfast ended. It was the taste of love baked daily, patient and proud. Fried catfish and cornbread was a breakfast plate that reflected the abundance of rivers and the skill of African American cooks in the South. Catfish could be caught at little cost, cleaned, coated in cornmeal, and fried crisp in cast-iron skillets. Paired with hot cornbread fresh from the oven, the meal was both hearty and nourishing. It gave workers the energy needed for long days in the fields, and children the strength to get through school without hunger. Families often made it on weekends when fishing provided enough to share with neighbors, turning it into a communal meal. The taste was bold and rustic, with a combination of crunchy fish and soft bread that defined comfort. Though fish is not often associated with breakfast today, fried catfish and cornbread once stood proudly on morning tables. It remains a reflection of resilience and resourcefulness, showing how nature and tradition came together to sustain communities. Leftover fish and grits were a breakfast that turned yesterday's dinner into something new and comforting. Grandparents knew better than to waste good fried fish, and reheating it in the morning gave the house a rich, savory smell that made everyone wander toward the kitchen. The fish was warmed gently, keeping the crust crisp, then served alongside a bowl of buttery grits that balanced the strong flavor with something soft and smooth. It was a combination rooted in coastal and southern traditions, where fish was common and grits were always waiting in the pantry. Children grew up thinking nothing of fish for breakfast, tasting the salty crunch next to the warm creaminess of the grits. It was hearty, practical, and filling, the kind of breakfast that made you ready for a full day's work or school. Even today, one bite can transport people back to kitchens where cast-iron pans never cooled and breakfast tasted like the continuation of joy from the night before. Scrapple was the breakfast that turned thrift into art. Born in the mid-Atlantic, it began as a mix of pork trimmings, cornmeal, and spices, cooked until thick and poured into a loaf to set. Once chilled, it was sliced and fried until crisp on the outside and soft within. The result was savory, hearty, and unlike anything else, a flavor that lingered long after the plate was empty. For generations, scrapple was the farmer's first meal, eaten with eggs or syrup depending on the mood. It carried the spirit of practicality, nothing wasted, everything used. What began as a way to stretch ingredients became a tradition, one that still lives on in diners and family kitchens. Scrapple was breakfast for people who worked hard and appreciated the simple genius of turning leftovers into something extraordinary. It was humble, yes, but it was also pride in edible form. Leftover sweet potato pie filling spread on toast became Thanksgiving morning sweetness that used every bit of holiday preparation. When grandmothers made sweet potato pies for dinner, extra filling often remained in the mixing bowl. Rather than waste it, the spiced sweet potato mixture was spread thick on toasted bread, creating breakfast that tasted like dessert. The filling contained eggs, milk, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, making it nutritious as well as delicious. Children loved this unexpected treat, feeling like they were getting away with eating pie for breakfast. Adults enjoyed the creative repurposing, appreciating how nothing was wasted. The sweet potatoes provided vitamins and fiber while the toast offered substance and texture. This breakfast cost nothing extra since it used ingredients already prepared for the day's feast. Leftover sweet potato pie filling on toast represented the ultimate waste-not wisdom, showing how grandmothers viewed every ingredient as precious. Banana pecan. Quick bread filled homes with the warm fragrance of ripe fruit and toasted nuts, offering a moist and hearty slice that worked as both breakfast and snack. Overripe bananas were mashed into a batter of flour, butter, and eggs, ensuring natural sweetness and tender texture. Chopped pecans folded through the mixture added a gentle crunch and a rich, nutty flavor that deepened as the loaf baked. Some families added a splash of vanilla or a pinch of cinnamon for extra aroma, while others left the recipe pure and simple. Sliced thick and served warm with a pat of butter, banana pecan quick bread made busy mornings feel a little more indulgent without requiring elaborate preparation. It became a beloved treat in African American kitchens, where thrift and flavor often went hand in hand. This bread proved that everyday ingredients, when combined with care, could produce a breakfast that felt special and comforting, filling kitchens with the scent of love and tradition. Potato hash with onions and peppers was the morning's miracle made from scraps. Grandparents diced leftover boiled potatoes, tossing them into a skillet slick with grease. Onions and peppers joined next, sizzling until soft and golden. The smell rose up, sweet, smoky, and alive. Salt and pepper did the rest, no fancy spices needed. The potatoes crisped at the edges, turning brown and crunchy while the center stayed soft. Served hot with eggs or bread, it filled the room with satisfaction. It was the kind of meal that looked humble but felt whole. You could feed a family on it, stretch it for another day, or serve it proudly on Sunday. Potato hash with onions and peppers was proof that waste didn't exist in a wise kitchen. Every bit could be reborn, every leftover turned into something loved. Sometimes sausage or fatback joined the pan, adding depth and flavor, but the dish never needed more than care. It carried the rhythm of home, the steady scrape of a spatula, the pop of oil, the warmth of shared hunger met with love. Cheese grits casserole was the Southern gift that made Christmas brunch feel complete. Grandparents mixed slow-cooked grits with butter, eggs, and a mountain of shredded cheese until the pot turned golden and glossy. Poured into a baking dish, it went into the oven to rise, the top forming a soft crust that bubbled at the edges. When it came out, the house filled with the scent of warmth and home. The casserole was creamy and rich, each spoonful smooth like velvet, with a hint of salt and sharp cheddar. It was shared at tables surrounded by cousins, friends, and faith. Served beside ham, sausage, or fried apples, it tied every plate together. Cheese grits casserole wasn't just food, it was comfort made tangible, the taste of Christmas morning and all its quiet joy. Even the leftovers felt like love reheated. The way it held heat long after leaving the oven made it the heart of every brunch table. Grandparents would scoop it proudly, watching butter melt into every golden layer. It was both humble and grand, a dish that felt like sunlight on a cold morning. Cheese grits casserole carried the story of the South, slow-cooked, soulful, and full of love that lingered in every bite. Butter-fried cornbread slices were the kind of breakfast that made you sit up a little straighter just from the smell alone. Leftover cornbread never went to waste, especially not when a skillet and a bit of butter could transform it into something golden, crisp, and wonderfully indulgent. Grandparents sliced the cornbread thick, letting the butter melt across the hot pan before laying each piece down to brown. The edges crisped quickly, creating a contrast to the soft center that felt almost like cake without the sweetness. Some families ate it plain, others added syrup or honey, and some sprinkled sugar over the top, but every version tasted rich and deeply satisfying. This was breakfast that reminded you of cast-iron skillets, warm kitchens, and mornings that started long before the sun rose high. Butter-fried cornbread slices were a way to stretch yesterday's food into today's comfort. Grits with cheese and fried eggs became Thanksgiving morning fuel that prepared families for hours of cooking and welcoming relatives. The grits were cooked low and slow, stirred patiently until creamy, then mixed with sharp cheddar that melted into golden richness. Eggs fried in bacon grease created crispy edges and runny yolks that mixed with the grits like natural gravy. This combination delivered protein and energy in portions generous enough to last through morning chaos. In Black Southern households, grits weren't just breakfast, but foundation food connecting families to their agricultural roots. Grandmothers seasoned them with salt, pepper, and butter. The cheese added calcium while eggs provided protein when meat was saved for dinner. Children scraped their bowls clean. Teenagers ate double portions before being sent on errands. Grits with cheese and fried eggs represented practical wisdom of feeding families well on limited budgets. Sorghum syrup. Waffles filled kitchens with the warm scent of toasted grain and caramel sweetness, creating a breakfast that tasted like a weekend celebration. Batter made with fresh eggs and rich milk cooked in cast-iron waffle irons until crisp and golden, ready to catch every drop of thick sorghum syrup. This dark, earthy sweetener offered a depth of flavor beyond ordinary maple, with notes of molasses and a hint of smoke from the cane fields. Families in the South prized sorghum for its nutritional value and natural richness, making it a treasured pantry staple. Some cooks whipped a little butter into the syrup for a glossy glaze, while others drizzled it straight from the jar, letting the bold taste speak for itself. Sorghum syrup waffles reflected African-American culinary heritage and the ability to elevate basic ingredients into something memorable, creating a breakfast that lingered in both flavor and memory. Every crunchy bite, followed by sticky sweetness, felt like a slow morning worth savoring. Mustard greens with cornbread was a savory pairing that many families leaned on as a breakfast, though it was eaten at other times of day too. Mustard greens, boiled until tender, were seasoned with bits of pork fat or salt for flavor. Eaten alongside hot cornbread, the meal balanced vitamins with starch, offering both nutrition and energy. It was cheap, filling, and deeply tied to tradition. For children, the bitterness of the greens was often softened by crumbling cornbread into the potlikker broth, making it more palatable. Adults valued it as a sustaining meal that honored resourcefulness and cultural heritage. Mustard greens with cornbread symbolized strength and survival, representing the kind of food that nourished more than just hunger. It was humble, but it carried families through mornings when resources were thin, but resolve was strong. This dish was one of the quiet backbones of community kitchens, a reflection of endurance and resilience during times of hardship. Cornbread and buttermilk was breakfast born of simplicity and strength. Grandparents crumbled leftover cornbread into bowls, poured cold buttermilk over the top, and stirred until soft and thick. It was tangy, creamy, and filling, the perfect meal when cupboards were bare. The sourness of the buttermilk balanced the sweetness of the bread, making each bite taste new again. It was food that cooled the body in summer, soothed it in winter, and satisfied hunger all year long. No stove, no fuss, just ingredients that were always on hand. It was eaten with a spoon, quiet and steady, often in the same bowls used for supper. There was nothing fancy about it, but it carried the wisdom of generations: never waste, never want. It was a poor person's breakfast, yes, but one made with pride. Some folks added a pinch of salt or a drizzle of syrup, but it never needed more than it had. The clinking of spoons and the sound of quiet chewing told stories of endurance and contentment. In a world that asked for more, this humble meal taught gratitude for what was already there. Chitlin scramble was one of those breakfasts that spoke directly to resourcefulness and resilience. Chitlins, or pig intestines, were cleaned thoroughly, boiled until tender, and then chopped into small pieces. They were folded into scrambled eggs with onions, creating a dish that was both filling and flavorful. The onions added sweetness, the eggs brought balance, and the chitlins gave a richness that turned the plate into something hearty. Though chitlins are often remembered as a holiday food today, many families once ate them regularly because they were inexpensive and ensured that no part of the hog was wasted. For farm workers and laborers, a plate of chitlin scramble gave strength before long hours of work. It was not a fancy breakfast, but it was deeply tied to survival and tradition. The aroma filled kitchens, and though strong, it carried memories of both family gatherings and everyday meals. Chitlin scramble represented more than food. It was heritage served hot on the morning table. Hominy with butter and pepper was the kind of breakfast that lived quietly in the background of many households, long before grits became the default choice. Hominy had a soft bite and a mild flavor that absorbed butter beautifully, turning each spoonful into something warm and soothing. Grandparents would heat it in a pot, stirring in butter until it melted completely, then add black pepper to give it depth and warmth. It was simple, inexpensive, and filling, the kind of breakfast made for mornings when the body needed steady fuel more than excitement. Children often ate it without thinking much about it, unaware that it connected them to older food traditions that stretched back generations. Hominy was a reminder of how African American families made the most of staple ingredients, honoring older methods while building new routines bowl after bowl. It offered comfort that lasted far longer than the meal itself. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cream was the quiet comfort of a cold morning, a dish that asked for nothing but gave everything. Rolled oats simmered slowly until soft, the steam fogging up windows and waking up sleepy kitchens. A spoonful of brown sugar swirled into the bowl, melting into ribbons of sweetness. Then came a splash of cream, turning it all silky and rich. It was breakfast that stayed with you, not just in the stomach, but in the heart. For children, it meant warmth before a long walk to school. For adults, it meant strength to face a long day. Oatmeal was a small act of love, steady and reliable, a simple way of saying, "You matter." Grandparents knew that food like this built more than bodies, it built belonging. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cream was proof that kindness could be served in a bowl. Fried hominy with onions and butter became Thanksgiving morning comfort that connected families to Native American and African culinary traditions. Canned hominy, those large white corn kernels processed with lye, were drained and fried in butter with sliced onions until everything turned golden. The hominy developed crispy exteriors while staying soft inside, and the onions caramelized into sweetness. This breakfast was filling, affordable, and quick to prepare. Hominy represented the indigenous knowledge that African Americans adopted and adapted, creating dishes honoring multiple heritage streams. The corn's substantial texture provided satisfaction. Children enjoyed the mild flavor and interesting texture. Adults valued how the dish provided lasting energy without requiring much time or money. Fried hominy with onions proved that simple preparation could honor complex cultural histories. Cornmeal. Hoe cakes with honey butter sizzled on griddles across the South, offering a thin and crispy alternative to traditional pancakes. Finely ground cornmeal was whisked with hot water and a pinch of salt, then spooned onto a greased skillet where it cooked to a golden brown. The edges crisped while the center stayed tender, creating a satisfying contrast in every bite. A pat of soft butter blended with golden honey melted over the warm cakes, adding sweetness that complemented the rustic corn flavor. Hoe cakes were beloved for their simplicity and speed, perfect for busy mornings or serving alongside eggs and greens. African American cooks carried this tradition from farm kitchens to city apartments, showing how a few ingredients could become a breakfast favorite. Children loved them plain, while adults enjoyed the gentle sweetness of honey butter that pooled across the hot surface. Cornmeal hoe cakes with honey butter proved that the humblest grains could shine when cooked with skill, care, and a sense of history. Rye coffee substitute with toast was born out of scarcity, but it carried warmth into countless mornings. Coffee beans were expensive and often hard to find, so roasted rye grains were brewed instead, producing a hot, bitter drink that resembled coffee. Families paired it with toast made from whatever bread was available, sometimes stale but still sustaining. The ritual of drinking a hot beverage in the morning mattered as much as the food itself, offering comfort before facing long days of uncertainty. Adults leaned on this substitute to keep their routines intact, finding strength in familiarity even without the real thing. Toast added bulk, and sometimes apple butter or syrup was spread on top if there was any to spare. Rye coffee substitute with toast reflected the creativity of families who refused to give up small comforts despite financial strain. It carried both warmth and resolve, fueling people with more than calories. It gave them routine and stability. Blackstrap molasses porridge was strong, bitter, and full of life. Grandparents stirred it thick over a slow flame, blending cornmeal, milk, and a spoonful of molasses until it darkened like caramel. The taste was deep, sweet with a bite of iron, a tonic for tired bones and empty cupboards. It was the kind of breakfast that gave strength more than comfort, a reminder that food could heal as much as it could fill. The steam rose slow and sweet, wrapping the room in the scent of perseverance. Each spoonful was medicine disguised as sustenance, a ritual that kept hearts and hands working through the hardest mornings. Some mornings it was thinned with water, other times thick enough to hold a spoon upright. Grandparents ate it quietly, knowing it would carry them through the day. It was survival served in a bowl, humble but powerful, like endurance made edible. Fried apples with cinnamon turned Christmas mornings into something golden and sweet. Grandparents peeled the apples thin, letting them fall into a skillet of melted butter and sugar. The sizzle was gentle, like music in the background of a winter morning. Cinnamon and nutmeg dusted over top filled the room with spice and memory. The apples softened slow, turning syrupy and caramelized, their scent seeping through the house. Served warm beside biscuits, sausage, or pancakes, they brought dessert to breakfast. Each spoonful felt like sunlight after cold nights, simple, shining, and kind. The flavor lingered long after the plate was empty, wrapping the heart in warmth. Fried apples weren't fancy, but they were love in its purest form, the kind passed from pan to pan across generations. Grandparents often saved the syrup from the pan, drizzling it over biscuits so not a drop went to waste. It was a taste of patience and pride, proof that sweetness could always be found even in the simplest kitchens. The smell stayed in the air like a song that never ended, marking every Christmas morning with the same golden glow. Fried salmon patties for breakfast might seem unusual today, but for many African American families in the 60s and 70s, canned salmon was a dependable pantry staple that worked for any meal of the day. Grandparents mixed the salmon with breadcrumbs, onions, and seasoning, shaping it into patties that sizzled in the skillet until crisp. The smell filled the kitchen with something hearty and inviting, a bold start to the morning that made you feel ready for whatever the day demanded. Served with grits or biscuits, the patties tasted rich and satisfying, proof that canned ingredients could create meals full of flavor and comfort. Salmon was not expensive, but it felt special, which made breakfast feel special too. Children grew used to that savory taste long before they ever tried a restaurant version. Fried salmon patties were practical, filling, and unforgettable, a reminder of how creativity in the kitchen shaped so many childhood mornings. Cold fried chicken leftovers were proof that good food never needed to be reheated to be loved. The night before, it was a Sunday feast, fried golden and eaten hot. By morning, it was breakfast straight from the icebox. The crust lost its crunch, but gained a flavor all its own, peppery, savory, and soaked with memories of yesterday's dinner. Paired with a biscuit or just eaten with bare fingers, it was a quiet pleasure before the day's work began. There was no ceremony to it, no fuss, just the understanding that fried chicken was too good to waste. In farm kitchens where every meal counted, leftovers became luxury. Cold chicken tasted of thrift, of gratitude, of knowing how to make joy last. Some folks swore it tasted even better that way, seasoned twice, once by the skillet and once by time. It was food you did not rush, food that let the morning feel unhurried. Fried cornmeal hoe cakes with apple butter connected families to their agricultural heritage and survival traditions. The hoe cakes were mixed from cornmeal, water, and salt, then fried on hot griddles until golden brown with crispy edges. Apple butter made from fall apples cooked down with spices provided sweetness without expensive jam. This breakfast appeared on Thanksgiving because both cornmeal and apples were fall harvest products. Grandmothers made dozens of hoe cakes, stacking them high and keeping them warm under kitchen towels. The name itself carried history, referencing when field workers cooked cornmeal cakes on hoes over open fires. Children spread apple butter thick, enjoying the sweet tart flavor against earthy corn. Adults paired them with coffee, appreciating how the simple combination provided energy. Hoe cakes cost almost nothing but delivered satisfaction. They represented ingenuity of turning basic staples into something worth celebrating. Salmon croquettes with grits turned pantry staples into a breakfast feast that felt both luxurious and familiar across African American communities of the 1970s. Canned salmon was flaked into a bowl with onions, breadcrumbs, and a little seasoning, then shaped into neat patties ready for the skillet. As they fried, the croquettes developed a crisp golden crust while staying moist inside, their aroma mingling with the gentle steam of creamy stone-ground grits bubbling nearby. This pairing brought together the coastal traditions of the South and the practicality of modern kitchens, where canned fish kept well and stretched to feed a family. Some cooks added a squeeze of lemon or a pinch of cayenne for extra brightness and heat, while others folded in fresh herbs from backyard gardens. Served with a side of sliced tomatoes or greens, salmon croquettes with grits delivered protein, comfort, and a taste of heritage, showing how everyday ingredients could be elevated into a soulful breakfast worth savoring. Cold cornbread and milk was often called the poor man's cereal, but it was more than a label, it was a lifeline. Day-old cornbread, often too dry to eat on its own, was crumbled into bowls and covered with milk or buttermilk, creating a filling meal that could be eaten quickly before school or work. For children, it was breakfast. For adults, it was sometimes supper, proving its versatility. It carried a tangy, comforting flavor that became familiar in many Southern households. What made it special was not the taste alone, but the reminder that nothing was wasted, not even stale bread. In communities with little to spare, this dish represented survival and practicality. Cold cornbread and milk was part of the rhythm of daily life, a dish that carried generations through hard times and into mornings of determination. Even with its simplicity, it gave people what they needed to keep going during days that demanded courage and endurance. Fried bologna and eggs were the kind of breakfast that came from both love and necessity. The skillet hit the stove before the sun came up, its heat waking the house faster than any clock could. Grandparents sliced slits in the edges of the bologna so it would not curl, laying each piece flat to sizzle in the pan. The smell was sharp and smoky, filling the kitchen with a promise that no one would start the day hungry. Once browned and blistered at the edges, the bologna came out and the eggs went in, frying in the same grease for flavor that no oil could match. Some mornings they scrambled them with onions. Other days they fried them hard with crisp edges. Served on white bread or next to grits, it was a meal that filled stomachs and spirits alike. Kids called it breakfast meat, never thinking about how little it cost, just how good it tasted. It was a worker's breakfast, the kind that kept strength in the body and dignity in the home. The bologna might have come from a bargain pack, but when it hit that skillet, it turned into gold. It was not about luxury. It was about knowing how to make something small feel mighty. The sound of grease popping was a morning song, one that told you life might be hard, but you would always eat. Sweet potato coffee cake was a breakfast that carried warmth, thrift, and community in every slice. Families would mash leftover sweet potatoes into the batter, seasoning it with cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes cloves before baking it in heavy cast-iron pans that gave it a perfect crust. The result was moist and spiced, with a natural sweetness that came not from sugar, but from the potatoes themselves, making it both healthy and filling. It was often served at church gatherings or Sunday breakfasts when a little something special was needed on the table to bring people together. The dish reflected African American traditions of stretching what was available into something memorable, proving that nothing went to waste in kitchens where creativity was survival. Sweet potatoes were plentiful and affordable, making them an easy way to feed a family while also adding vitamins and nourishment to the meal. The cake was often paired with coffee, hot milk, or even molasses drinks, making it a centerpiece of mornings that were simple yet comforting. Though it is rarely baked today, this coffee cake once carried generations through hard times and sweet mornings alike, leaving memories of warmth, family, and resilience with every bite. Country sausage patties with cane syrup were a sweet and savory breakfast that carried the flavor of Southern tradition. Grandparents often made sausage from scratch or bought it fresh, shaping it into patties with practiced hands. The patties sizzled in the skillet, filling the house with a smell that meant the day was off to a strong start. Once cooked, they were served alongside cane syrup, thick and dark, ready for dipping or drizzling. The combination of salty sausage and sweet syrup created a harmony that felt indulgent even when the ingredients were simple. It stuck to your ribs, kept you full, and tasted like a morning wrapped in warmth. Cane syrup was cheaper and easier to find than maple syrup, but it had a bold flavor all its own. Families passed down the preference across generations, pairing it with biscuits, sausage, and sometimes even eggs. Country sausage patties with cane syrup were more than breakfast. They were the memory of Sunday mornings, crowded tables, and laughter rising like steam from the skillet. Apple butter toast was the kind of breakfast that came with a story. Thick, spiced apple butter spread over warm toast turned ordinary mornings into something memorable. The butter's deep brown color came from hours of slow cooking. Apples simmered with sugar, cinnamon, and cloves until they transformed into a smooth, fragrant paste. Grandparents often made it in big batches, filling jars to last through winter. Each spoonful carried the patience of a day spent stirring at the stove. On cold mornings, that same spread met the crackle of toast, melting slightly into the crumb, releasing a scent that filled the whole kitchen. It was sweet but grounded, rich but not heavy, the taste of comfort that lasted long after the meal was done. Apple butter toast wasn't about extravagance. It was about preservation, tradition, and the art of making something beautiful from what you grew. Fried apple hand pies made from dough scraps turned yesterday's pie making into today's breakfast feast. After preparing pies for dinner, grandmother saved every scrap of dough, rolling them thin and filling them with spiced apples cooked down with sugar and cinnamon. The small pockets were sealed tight, then fried in hot lard until golden brown and crispy outside while the filling bubbled inside. Children woke to the smell of frying dough and sweet apples. These hand pies were portable, perfect for eating while helping with preparations. The cost was nearly nothing since they used scraps that would otherwise be discarded, proving waste not wisdom. Families made dozens, stacking them on plates covered with towels to stay warm. Adults paired them with strong black coffee while children drank milk. Fried apple hand pies weren't about elegance, but making joy from leftovers. They represented creativity that turned scarcity into celebration. Country sausage and red pepper gravy turned ordinary biscuits into a feast, combining smoky pork with the sweetness of peppers and onions. Sausage browned slowly in a heavy skillet, releasing drippings that formed the base of a creamy gravy thickened with flour and milk. Strips of red bell pepper and chopped onions simmered in the mixture, lending a vibrant color and a subtle sweetness that balanced the savory richness. Poured over split biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked into every layer, ensuring each bite was flavorful and filling. In African American kitchens of the 1970s, this dish represented comfort and abundance, a way to stretch a small amount of meat into a meal for the entire family. Some cooks added a touch of crushed red pepper for gentle heat, while others served sliced tomatoes alongside for freshness. Country sausage and red pepper gravy brought together bold taste and home-style satisfaction, making mornings feel special even on the busiest days. Fried salt pork and gravy was breakfast born from preservation and patience. Grandparents sliced the cured meat thin, sizzling it in a skillet until the fat turned crisp and fragrant. The salty aroma filled the air, sharp but comforting. The leftover drippings stayed in the pan, thickened with flour and water to make a gravy that stretched across biscuits or grits. It was heavy, hearty, and enough to fuel long days of work. Every piece of pork carried the taste of tradition, food made to last, food that respected every scrap. The gravy was creamy and rich, coating the plate like warmth itself. Children wiped their plates clean with biscuits, unwilling to waste even a drop. It was not fancy, but it was full of care, a reminder that flavor could rise from necessity. In that skillet, hardship turned into something nourishing, something that said, "We made it through another morning." Leftover pie for breakfast was a common occurrence in large households where nothing was wasted. Sweet potato pie, chess pie, or fruit pies baked the night before were often sliced and eaten cold in the morning with coffee or milk. For children, it was an exciting way to begin the day, while adults saw it as practical and filling. It reflected the rhythm of large families, where every meal had to stretch, and desserts could not be reserved only for evenings. Leftover pie carried both joy and necessity, showing how households turned indulgence into sustenance. The flavors of cinnamon, nutmeg, and sweet roots lingered, making mornings brighter even when other meals were sparse. Eating pie for breakfast symbolized both frugality and comfort, a way of preserving energy and spirit in difficult times. Leftover pie for breakfast became a fond memory for many, a dish that reflected resilience and the creativity of stretching food in every way possible. Rice porridge with butter and sugar was quiet comfort, the kind of breakfast that soothed cold Christmas mornings. Grandparents simmered leftover rice in milk until it softened into a creamy base. A spoonful of butter melted on top, swirling gold into white. Sugar sprinkled over it turned the first bite into nostalgia, sweet, soft, and warm. It filled the stomach and calmed the spirit, a meal that asked for nothing but a slow moment. Some added cinnamon, others raisins, but the magic was in the simplicity. It was food that wrapped you up like a blanket, reminding you that even leftovers could feel like luxury when made with love. Families sat close, sharing stories between bites, steam rising from their bowls. Rice porridge with butter and sugar wasn't loud or showy, it was memory itself, humble and full of grace. Sorghum syrup on hot biscuits was a rural breakfast tradition rooted in the fields and farms where sorghum was grown and milled long before maple syrup ever became common. The syrup was thick, earthy, and rich, with a sweetness that felt deeper than sugar. Grandparents would split open hot biscuits, steam rising, and drizzle sorghum across the soft center until it glistened. The flavor was bold and comforting, slightly smoky, and entirely unique. It tasted like the land itself, like seasons of harvest and the steady work of hands that knew how to make every ingredient count. Biscuits with sorghum were inexpensive, filling, and quietly indulgent in their own rustic way. Families loved them because the syrup lasted long, cost little, and carried the taste of home. Even today, those who grew up with sorghum syrup remember its distinct sweetness with a kind of affection that never fades. Poached eggs on toast were breakfast elegance in a world that rarely had time for it. Water simmered just below boiling, and eggs were lowered gently, their whites curling around the yolks like soft silk. When lifted out and set on buttered toast, they gleamed, tender, trembling, and perfect. A sprinkle of salt and pepper was all it needed. It was a dish that made even a modest kitchen feel refined. The first cut of the knife released a golden stream that soaked into the bread, rich and warm. This breakfast carried a sense of calm, the quiet kind that came before a day's labor. Grandparents who made poached eggs treated it like a ritual, never rushed, always patient. It was proof that even in lean times, beauty could live on the breakfast plate. Poached eggs on toast weren't about luxury. They were about intention, about giving the morning the dignity it deserved. Fried salt pork with gravy over toast was Thanksgiving morning protein using preserved meat to create richness families couldn't afford fresh. Salt pork, the preserved fatback that lasted months without refrigeration, was sliced thin and fried until crispy in cast iron skillets. The rendered fat was used to make gravy by adding flour and milk, creating creamy sauce poured over toasted bread. This breakfast provided essential calories and fat, helping families survive cold mornings before central heating. The salt pork was economical because it used pig parts preserved through salting to last through seasons. Grandmothers kept slabs in cool places, slicing off pieces as needed. The gravy stretched the meat to feed larger groups, with toast soaking up every drop. Children learned to appreciate this combination. Adults valued how the breakfast delivered energy without requiring fresh meat purchases. Salt pork with gravy was honest nourishment, proving preserved foods could create satisfaction. Catfish and grits gave weekend mornings a soulful edge, pairing crisp fried fish with creamy stone-ground grits in a combination that felt both rustic and celebratory. Fresh river catfish fillets were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a dusting of cornmeal before sliding into hot oil where they sizzled to a golden brown. The grits simmered slowly on the stove, enriched with butter and a touch of cream for a silky texture that balanced the crunch of the fish. Families often gathered around big skillets of catfish on Sundays after church, turning breakfast into a communal event. Some added a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce to brighten the flavors, while others served sliced tomatoes or greens on the side. Catfish and grits carried the heritage of southern waterways and the ingenuity of African-American cooks who transformed local catches into a beloved morning feast that satisfied hunger and celebrated the bounty of rivers and farms alike. Onion and potato hash cakes were one of those breakfasts that always felt hearty, even without meat. Potatoes and onions were grated, mixed with flour or cornmeal, and fried into crisp patties that could be eaten plain or with hot sauce if available. The dish was cheap, easy to prepare, and could stretch across several plates, making it ideal for large households. It was often made in the early mornings before children headed to school or adults to long shifts at work. The taste was simple but filling, a combination of flavors that became closely tied to daily life in tough years. Families leaned on it not only for its thrift, but for the comfort it gave in the face of uncertainty. Onion and potato hash cakes fueled countless mornings of determination, carrying people through struggles outside the kitchen. They became a dish remembered not just for their flavor, but for their role in sustaining courage and community. Fried apples and bread turned scraps into satisfaction. Old apples, soft and spotted, were sliced and tossed into a pan with sugar, butter, or lard. The smell of caramel and warmth filled the room as they softened and browned. Day-old bread joined the mix, soaking up every drop of syrupy sweetness. It was rich, sweet, and comforting, the kind of meal that made even the poorest kitchens feel rich. Grandparents served it warm, sometimes with a sprinkle of cinnamon if they had it. The taste lingered like kindness itself, proof that waste was never an option when love and patience were in the kitchen. The sizzling sound from the skillet was music, soft, steady, and full of promise. Kids would gather near the stove, waiting for their turn with a fork. Even on the leanest mornings, this dish made the home smell alive. It was food made from nothing but hope, sweetened by care. Buttermilk pancakes with sorghum syrup were the taste of Southern Christmas mornings, sweet, warm, and steady. Grandparents stirred batter smooth in a big bowl, the sound of the whisk keeping rhythm with gospel playing low on the radio. The griddle hissed as each ladle of batter hit, spreading into circles that browned just right. When stacked high, the pancakes steamed like soft clouds waiting for the pour. Sorghum syrup, thick and dark, flowed slow over the top, pooling in the edges. Its taste was deep, old-fashioned, with hints of caramel and smoke. Families gathered sleepy-eyed around the table, watching the syrup drip and laughing softly at the morning quiet. Every forkful was sweet and grounding, comfort that didn't need decoration. Pancakes were never just pancakes. They were a small promise of good things ahead, a Christmas tradition that spoke of love more than luxury. Fried mullet with hush puppies brought the flavor of coastal mornings to inland tables, celebrating the bounty of southern waters. Fresh mullet fillets were seasoned and lightly dredged in cornmeal before being fried to a crisp golden finish, their mild flesh staying tender and flaky. Alongside the fish, cornmeal hush puppies sizzled in the same hot oil, forming round fritters with a crunchy crust and soft, savory interior. The combination delivered a contrast of textures and tastes that spoke of seaside breakfasts and family gatherings. Some cooks added chopped onions or jalapenos to the hush puppies for an extra kick, while others served lemon wedges to brighten the fish. This meal reminded families of fishing trips, coastal traditions, and the joy of bringing fresh catch straight from net to skillet. Fried mullet with hush puppies honored African-American ties to coastal communities and the creative spirit of cooks who turned fresh seafood and simple cornmeal into a feast worth waking up early for. Cane syrup toast was sweetness for hard times. When butter ran out and sugar was gone, grandparents made syrup from cane or brown sugar water simmered until thick. They spread it over hot bread, watching it soak into every crumb. It was simple, sticky, and sweet enough to feel like dessert even when it was breakfast. The syrup clung to fingers, the bread soft and warm. It was a small joy, a reminder that sweetness could always be found, even in struggle. That first bite tasted like love disguised as survival, and for many, it was the best part of the morning. The syrup dripped slow, shining under morning light, while kids licked it from their hands and laughed. It was a moment of delight before a long day, proof that life's smallest blessings could still feel grand. Every bite carried the taste of resilience, turning scarcity into sweetness. Cornmeal donuts were one of the rare indulgences families created when they wanted sweetness but had little to spend. Made from cornmeal mixed with flour, eggs if available, and sweetened with a touch of sugar or molasses, the dough was shaped into rounds and fried in lard until golden. Dusted with sugar, they became a treat that brought children running to the table. Unlike bakery donuts, these were dense, filling, and rustic, but they carried a charm that came from being homemade. Families turned to them especially on weekends or special mornings when a little extra joy was needed to break the monotony of hardship. Cornmeal donuts were proof that celebration could exist even in times of scarcity, transforming everyday ingredients into something special. They were portable too, often tucked into lunch pails for later in the day. Cornmeal donuts may not have been fancy, but they were treasured, carrying both sweetness and comfort into mornings that demanded resilience. Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was a staple breakfast that reflected the creativity and resilience of African American kitchens in the South and beyond. The mush itself was simple, made from cornmeal cooked slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a smooth porridge that filled bowls generously. On its own, it was filling but plain, so families would drizzle sorghum syrup over the top to add sweetness and richness without needing expensive sugar. Sorghum was cheaper, widely available in the South, and deeply tied to farm life, making it a household staple for generations of working families. This dish was eaten hot at the table with spoons, sometimes with butter or milk added, or cooled in pans and sliced to be fried later as griddle cakes. For children, it was a comfort food that brought both energy and warmth on school mornings when bellies needed to be full. For adults, it was a dependable way to stretch limited supplies into a hearty start to the day, ensuring no one went hungry. Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was never fancy, but it was practical, satisfying, and deeply tied to the rhythm of working life. Scrapple slices were one of the most resourceful breakfasts older generations relied on, especially in regions where nothing from the pig went to waste. Scrapple mixed pork scraps with cornmeal and spices, forming a loaf that could be sliced and fried until crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. Grandparents cooked it in a hot skillet, letting each piece form that perfect golden crust that crackled slightly under the fork. It was savory, hearty, and deeply rooted in tradition, a dish born from the idea that every ingredient had value. Some families ate it plain, others added syrup or mustard, but no matter how it was served, scrapple had a distinctive flavor that stayed with you. It tasted like farm mornings, like smoke rising from cast iron pans, like a time when food came from skill rather than convenience. Children might turn up their noses at the idea today, but to those who grew up on it, scrapple was a breakfast that meant strength, thrift, and the comfort of knowing a meal would always be there. Even now, the memory of that sizzling sound brings people back to early mornings in small kitchens where tradition guided the skillet. Grapefruit with sugar and a broiled topping was the picture of mid-century sophistication, elegant yet born of practicality. Halved grapefruit was sprinkled with sugar and broiled just long enough for the top to bubble and brown, creating a caramelized glaze that softened the tartness beneath. Served in its own rind with a little spoon, it looked like something from a hotel breakfast tray. Housewives loved it because it felt fancy but cost almost nothing. The heat mellowed the fruit, making it warm and fragrant, the sugar turning into a crisp, golden shell. It was light, refreshing, and surprisingly indulgent for something so simple. For a generation discovering convenience and presentation, this dish was breakfast theater. Grapefruit with sugar was more than fruit. It was optimism, the taste of a new kind of morning when simplicity could still feel special. Some families added a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of cinnamon for extra warmth, while others topped it with a cherry for flair. It became a symbol of modern homemaking, polished, easy, and delightful to the eye. The broiled grapefruit was as much about beauty as flavor, proof that even the simplest fruit could feel luxurious when given a moment of care. Leftover ham biscuits made from holiday ham scraps became Thanksgiving morning sandwiches that children grabbed before running outside. Small pieces of ham left from trimming the holiday roast were diced and stuffed into split biscuits, sometimes with butter or mustard spread inside. These portable breakfasts could be eaten with one hand, making them perfect for active mornings. The ham provided protein and salt that woke up taste buds, while the biscuits offered satisfying bread that filled stomachs. Grandmothers made dozens of biscuits the day before, knowing they could be repurposed throughout the holiday. Children appreciated the convenience and familiar flavors. Adults valued how the scraps that might have been discarded became proper breakfast, proving nothing was too small. Leftover ham biscuits showed the thrift that defined Black Southern cooking, demonstrating how even small scraps deserved respect and could become meals families enjoyed. Leftover dressing fried into patties became Thanksgiving morning transformation that gave new life to yesterday's carefully prepared side dish that might otherwise have gone to waste. Cornbread dressing left from testing recipes was formed into palm-sized patties and fried in butter until crusty outside and soft inside. The herbs, onions, and celery in the dressing provided complex savory flavor, while frying added golden crust that made them irresistible to both children and adults alike. These patties could be eaten with eggs or alone, providing filling breakfast that satisfied without being heavy or overwhelming. Grandmothers valued this technique because it used food that might otherwise go stale, showing the waste not philosophy that guided their kitchens every single day without exception. Children enjoyed the crispy exterior and familiar flavors that reminded them of holiday dinners. Adults appreciated how the patties felt special and intentional rather than like simple leftovers. Sausage patties with fried apples made mornings feel rich, even when the pantry was bare. The sausage sizzled in a skillet, its fat spitting softly, while the kitchen filled with the smell of spice and salt. Apples, sliced thin, were dropped into the same pan afterward, soaking up the drippings until their edges caramelized. The result was a perfect balance of flavors: smoky meat and sweet fruit, savory and soft. Served side by side, they made an unlikely pair that just worked. The meal was hearty, comforting, and practical. 2 ingredients stretched to feed many. It was the kind of breakfast that fueled both body and heart, reminding families that creativity was the secret to good cooking. Every bite told a story of resourcefulness, of turning what you had into something worth remembering. Sometimes a touch of cinnamon or brown sugar was added to the apples, the sweetness blending with the sausage's spice to make every forkful unforgettable. It was a dish that filled bellies and lifted moods, proof that food didn't need luxury to feel abundant. This pairing of opposites, salt and sugar, crisp and soft, became a symbol of balance in the Southern kitchen. It was comfort on a plate, built from simple genius and the magic of making do. Stewed apples over grits was the quiet morning comfort many families turned to when fresh fruit was limited, but preserved apples were always within reach. Grandparents would slice apples thin and let them simmer with sugar or syrup until they softened into a fragrant golden mixture that tasted like fall in every season. Meanwhile, a pot of grits bubbled on the stove, thickening slowly as it absorbed the heat. When the stewed apples were spooned over the top, the contrast of creamy grits and sweet fruit felt like a small luxury. It was warm, filling, and gentle, the kind of breakfast that soothed the stomach and the spirit. Some families added cinnamon, others added butter, but most kept it simple because the apples were already sweet enough. This dish was a reminder of home orchards, backyard trees, and jars of preserves lined up on pantry shelves. It tasted like patience and tradition, like the kind of mornings where time moved slower. Even today, stewed apples over grits feels like a forgotten treasure from a quieter time. Pork neck bone and rice turned a humble cut into a deeply flavored breakfast that spoke to generations of resourceful cooking. Meaty pork neck bones were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until their rich broth infused every grain of rice. The long cooking released tenderness and flavor, transforming inexpensive ingredients into a dish that tasted luxurious. Families often added a pinch of red pepper or a splash of vinegar for brightness, while some stirred in greens for added nourishment. Served steaming hot, pork neck bone and rice offered hearty protein and comforting warmth that fueled long workdays. This meal reflected the African-American tradition of using every part of the animal with skill and respect, proving that nothing needed to be wasted to create something memorable. Pork neck bone and rice stood as both sustenance and celebration, a bowl of savory history that reminded everyone at the table of the creativity and strength passed down through kitchens across the South and beyond. Cornmeal mush with maple syrup was proof that humble food could still feel like luxury. The cornmeal simmered low and slow until thick, its subtle sweetness waiting beneath the surface. Poured into bowls, it became creamy comfort. Chilled overnight and fried, it became something new. Either way, a drizzle of maple syrup transformed it completely, golden, fragrant, and warm. It was the taste of patience rewarded, of kitchens that made the most out of little. Grandparents ate it without complaint. Children learned to love it without realizing it was born from necessity. The syrup soaked into every bite, blending with the corn's earthiness until it became something deeply satisfying. In hard times, it was survival. In better ones, it was nostalgia. Cornmeal mush reminded families that gratitude could be sweet, especially when poured warm from a jug and shared around the table. Some cooks stirred in butter or milk to make it richer, while others poured it into loaf pans and sliced it for frying the next day. It was a dish that shifted effortlessly between breakfast and supper, proof that versatility was the heart of thrift. The sound of it frying in a skillet, the scent of corn and syrup mingling in the air, it all spoke of comfort. Cornmeal mush was a quiet triumph, a reminder that even the plainest ingredients could carry grace. Peanut butter and corn syrup sandwiches were the kind of breakfast you could throw together in seconds, a heavy, sticky, sweet combination that kept kids full for hours. Grandparents spread thick peanut butter on soft sandwich bread and drizzled corn syrup over it, letting the syrup sink into the peanut butter until the whole thing clung together in a dense, satisfying bite. It was quick, cheap, and strong enough to carry a child through school mornings when there was no time for hot food. The sweetness blended with the saltiness of the peanut butter, creating a flavor that felt indulgent even though it came from pantry staples. Working households relied on this breakfast because it was dependable, affordable, and guaranteed to quiet hunger. Children loved its candy-like richness, even if the adults knew it was simply the best option available. Peanut butter and corn syrup sandwiches were a reminder of mornings shaped by love, necessity, and whatever ingredients were within reach. Pickled pig feet with bread were a dish that reflected both thrift and flavor, often served cold in rural communities as a morning meal. Pig feet, simmered and preserved in vinegar brine with spices, became a protein source that lasted far longer than fresh meat. Eaten with slices of bread, it was salty, tangy, and surprisingly filling. Families turned to it because it was cheap and practical, ensuring no part of the animal ever went to waste. The flavor carried a boldness that lingered, and though not every child enjoyed it, many adults looked back on it with fondness as a food of survival. In households where resources were scarce, a plate of pickled pig feet with bread could be enough to start the day. It was more than just sustenance. It was a dish that represented resilience and the ability to create meals from overlooked cuts. Pickled pig feet with bread carried strength, memory, and the taste of endurance in difficult times. Rice and raisin breakfast bowl turned leftover rice into a cozy, lightly sweet start to the day, perfect for stretching ingredients while feeding the family well. Cold rice was warmed in a saucepan with fresh milk, a spoonful of sugar, and a pinch of salt until creamy and fragrant. Plump raisins were stirred in, releasing their sweetness as they swelled in the heat. Some cooks added a dash of cinnamon or nutmeg for extra comfort, while others drizzled a bit of honey just before serving. This simple dish recalled generations of frugal but flavorful cooking, proving that nothing needed to be wasted to create a hearty meal. African American families valued its efficiency and warmth, often serving it with buttered toast or fruit on the side. Rice and raisin breakfast bowl demonstrated how the ingenuity of home cooks could transform plain leftovers into something soothing and delicious, a bowl that nourished both body and spirit during busy mornings or quiet weekend breakfasts alike. Red gravy with rice was a breakfast dish that combined economy with comfort in African American households. The gravy was made from tomatoes, onions, and seasoning, simmered until thick and poured over steaming rice. It was filling, affordable, and deeply satisfying, providing warmth and energy to carry through the day. For many families, rice was cheaper than bread and could be stretched to feed everyone, while tomatoes added both flavor and color. The dish was common across the South, where it became a daily staple for working people who needed hearty food before long hours of labor. Children often grew up with it as a familiar morning ritual, while adults valued its reliability and ease of preparation. Red gravy with rice was never fancy, but it symbolized resilience and the ability to make simple ingredients carry meaning. Though rarely served in breakfast form today, it was once a proud and practical tradition. Banana bread pudding cups were one of the most clever ways grandparents reused stale bread, turning dryness into softness and waste into warmth. They mashed ripe bananas into the bread with milk, sugar, and a bit of spice if it was available, folding everything together until the mixture became thick and custard-like, scooped into small baking dishes or muffin tins. The cups baked into soft, fragrant servings that filled the entire kitchen with the smell of banana and browned bread. It was breakfast that tasted like dessert, but no one ever complained. The bananas added sweetness and moisture, stretching the ingredients into something filling and gentle on the stomach. Grandparents made these cups because they could not bear to throw out bread and because they knew how to turn limitations into something delicious. Children loved the warm centers and the slightly crisp tops, not realizing the whole breakfast was built from leftovers. Banana bread pudding cups were a quiet victory in the kitchen, a reminder that thrift could still bring joy. Cheese toast made under the broiler was Thanksgiving morning indulgence that felt fancy despite its incredible simplicity and minimal ingredients that anyone could afford. Sliced bread was topped generously with butter and sharp cheddar cheese, then placed under the broiler until the cheese melted, bubbled, and turned golden brown at the edges, creating visual appeal. The toast emerged hot and crispy with cheese that stretched dramatically when pulled apart, delighting children who watched with fascination. This breakfast required minimal effort but delivered maximum satisfaction, making it perfect for busy Thanksgiving mornings when time was precious and attention divided. In Black households where cheese was valued but not always abundant throughout the year, cheese toast represented a small luxury that didn't break the already tight budget. Children loved watching the cheese melt through the oven window, mesmerized by the transformation happening before their eyes. Creole shrimp omelet brought the rich flavors of the Gulf Coast to morning tables, folding tender shrimp and fresh scallions into fluffy eggs seasoned with paprika and a touch of cayenne. Shrimp were quickly sautéed with butter and garlic until just pink, then combined with beaten eggs and poured into a hot skillet. As the omelet puffed, the seafood infused the eggs with a briny sweetness that spoke of Louisiana waters. Some cooks added diced bell peppers or a spoonful of tomato sauce for extra color and depth, while others finished with a squeeze of lemon. This breakfast balanced elegance and everyday comfort, reflecting African American culinary ties to coastal Creole traditions. Families savored the dish on special weekends or when fresh shrimp were plentiful, making breakfast feel like a celebration. The Creole shrimp omelet captured the spirit of New Orleans and the surrounding Gulf, proving that a simple egg dish could deliver vibrant flavor and a taste of Southern heritage before the day began. Hot water. Cornbread was the taste of resilience fried golden. Made from cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, it took almost nothing to prepare, just heat, hands, and a little patience. Grandparents mixed it until thick, shaped small patties, and dropped them into sizzling oil. The kitchen filled with that sound, soft crackles and promise. The outside crisped brown, the inside stayed tender, and the smell of corn filled the air. Served hot with greens, beans, or on its own, it was both bread and meal. It was the working person's comfort, made quick and eaten proud. No milk, no eggs, no fancy tools, just skill passed down through hands that refused to give up. Each bite was a memory of endurance, of turning a few ingredients into a reason to keep going. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was another way families made use of overlooked cuts of poultry. Necks were cheap, flavorful, and could be fried crisp, then served alongside fresh biscuits for a sustaining breakfast. The meat was small but savory, and paired with biscuits, it created a meal that felt hearty despite its thrift. Families appreciated it because it ensured that no part of the bird was wasted, stretching poultry into multiple meals. Children remembered picking the meat from the bones, while adults valued the fat and flavor that carried into the biscuits. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was more than just food. It was an expression of resourcefulness. It provided both protein and comfort, fueling families for demanding days of work or marches. This dish symbolized resilience, showing how households turned scraps into sustenance without losing pride. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was a taste of perseverance, remembered as one of the breakfasts that carried people through struggle. Egg and rice bowls were one of those fast, dependable breakfasts grandparents made without thinking, because the ingredients were always there and the result was always good. A pot of rice from last night could be rewarmed with a pat of butter, turning it soft and fragrant again. Then came the egg, fried or scrambled, laid gently over the top like a finishing touch. Only older hands knew how to time perfectly. The yolk soaked into the rice or the scrambled bits mixed through, creating a bowl that tasted warm, mild, and deeply comforting. It was cheap, quick, and endlessly reliable, the kind of breakfast that made mornings feel steady. Families loved it because nothing went to waste, because rice could stretch farther than any box of cereal ever could. Egg and rice bowls tasted like routine, like care, like the kind of quiet morning love that came before the sun was fully up. Smothered pork chops with onions turned breakfast into celebration. Grandparents browned the chops in a cast-iron skillet, letting the onions caramelize slow in their drippings. Flour and broth thickened the mix into gravy, smooth and rich. The smell filled the kitchen. Sweet onions, savory meat, and love mingling in the air. Served over grits or rice, it became the kind of meal you remembered long after. It was the taste of family gathered close, of warmth against winter cold. Each forkful carried tenderness and tradition, the flavors deep as memory. Smothered pork chops were Sunday food, but on Christmas morning, they were grace itself, rich, golden, and full of heart. Every bite felt like a thank you to those who came before, who taught that food was more than sustenance. It was love made visible. What did your mother make before work? Drop your 1970s breakfast memory in the comments, hit like and subscribe for more meals that started our days right.